While adoption is accelerating, organizations worldwide are also grappling with governance, compliance, risk, and responsibility, questions that go well beyond technology. To explore this, we are delighted to be joined virtually by Sunu Engineer, joining us live from Germany. Sunu is a technology leader and AI expert with deep expertise across AI and machine learning, blockchain, and enterprise systems, and is widely recognized for building advanced scalable platforms. He holds a PhD in astrophysics and cosmology and a master's in physics, bringing scientific depth to enterprise AI. He is also an advisor to Hyreo on AI and global AI governance aspects. Sunu will share his insights on the compliance and governance challenges enterprise face as they scale AI and what leaders must consider to build trust and accountability. Please join me in welcoming Sunu Engineer. Over to you, Sunu.
Thank you. Thank you, Aditi. So, given and the shortage of time, I decided that I will tell you a little bit of the story of how we are going to do compliance in the AI world by focusing on the problem of compliance itself. Of course, I'm aware that all of you have come mostly from the perspective of the human resource management and other forms of enterprise knowledge. But I wanted to bring up something that is becoming more and more germane. As Aditi said, I actually live in Germany and I work in EU and I work with the EU Commission and the governments and so on. And in the European Union, there is considerable amount of activity post the EU AI Act in dealing with something known as the CRA, the Cyber Resilience Act and Network Information Security Act. And these are acts dealing with artificial intelligence as well as with cybersecurity, cybersecurity and with the way digital services are delivered in the EU, which blur the distinction between governance and compliance. And I thought this would be a particularly important thing to speak about. So that's why I've prepared a few slides, just a small set for you to get an idea without going too deep into it. Let me just pull up my slides, right? So I presume you can see the slides now, right? Okay, so what the problem that we are trying to sort out is, let's look at application of AI in the enterprise. There are many places where AI can go in. And one place which the enterprise really does not like to do is compliance and audits related to compliance and preparing this huge documentary structure. Anytime you have going from ISO 9001 to 27001 or 42000 right now, right? As well as the other variety of standards that you have to comply with, you realize that there is a lot of difficulty in getting the data together, getting this compliance done, and it has been a nightmarish thing and a costly thing for enterprises. And India is relatively lightweight. US is one of the lightest of all, right? Except in the healthcare space, perhaps. And EU is the heaviest regulatory structure. So in the EU, the regulatory surface keeps expanding, and now it has come to the point where they are saying that cybersecurity and the ability of systems, products sold in the EU or services in the EU are so critical, right, that their resilience requirements are so critical. Now, what they have done is to say that if a cybersecurity event happens in a product, effectively, we will take it out of the regulatory surface and make somebody in the company, it can be the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer, responsible for it, right? So now, in principle, that person becomes liable and can be, judged and indicted and so on and so forth. Now, the problem of regulatory compliance is moved into the problem of governance, right? The board becomes responsible for cybersecurity. So this is the way we see regulations evolving. The reason why it did not happen earlier is because if you told a human-driven company that you had to do all these regulatory compliances, it would simply not be possible. right? For example, as of yesterday, I do not know if you're aware, but because of the Grok AI's sexualized images of children and things like that, I was talking to the ministry in India yesterday, and they wanted to solve this problem, and they have taken the stand that we are going to cut down the response time for removing purportedly dangerous content from 36 hours to 3 hours. Right? This is another example, right? It is a new law that government has just passed, right? Now, what this means is that can enterprises react to such requirements without technology tools, without AI? And you will realize that as we go along, the classical way of doing compliance, right, as one of the Enterprise Act, is being replaced by artificial intelligence tools simply because a large part of compliance is related to documents, right, and data in linguistic form. So they said, all right, fine. What tools do we have to manage language well? The current set of AI tools, which evolved from the natural language processing techniques, transformers, and so on, is very good. So you're going to treat compliance as critical events in the infrastructure of the company, and you're going to use AI to solve the problem, right? And this is what I'm just going to talk about. Right? Now, the three regulatory frameworks that most of you are possibly familiar with, on the upper left, you see the EU kind of structure. It's a Gothic architecture, very clumsy, but very detailed and full of fine structure, right? And on the other hand, America, it's almost like a fast car, right? Like a racing car, which uses very light touches, right? And they say that there is a certain amount of control, certain amount of disclosure. And surprisingly, in terms of this AI governance, right, when AI is put into the marketplace, India is doing very well in coming up with a very streamlined, air traffic control is a good analogy, right, of trying to set up digital governance, which allows the marketplace to flourish. But at the same time, there is sufficient control, including, for example, there's another problem that I'm working with is the question of child safety, which is critical to India. Now, what we do, in order to do this, what we want to do is that compliance is no longer the domain of the legal office of the company. Right? So the chief legal officers and the rest of the legal team, they are not going to be the only people doing compliance. Compliance needs to be put into the company's products, company's services, into the company's processes by design. Right? And how do you do this is that all those documents which you were supposed to, the people were supposed to read themselves and interpret, we are using AI engines to convert them into these structured graph-like structures, right? We call them contextual graphs, right? And you can imagine that you have an HR policy which says that there is a certain way, certain class of people who should be hired, who should not be hired, and this is the way, or if there is a whistleblower, this is how a whistleblower structure should be handled and so on. And what we wish to do is to convert all of that into structured graph structures and automatically processed by engines, right? And you are making compliance much more logical, and in some senses you could call them mathematically strict. For example, data privacy. Right? We no longer treat data privacy as your compliance with the DPDP Act in India or with GDPR in the EU. Right? It's not enough to ask somebody questions, right? You have to ensure that you're processing the data in environments where privacy is mathematically guaranteed. For example, by using things like differential privacy or homomorphic encryption and so on. Right? So we are transitioning from an era of compliance in terms of a set of people deciding that, okay, this is sort of adherent, to moving towards actually using technology, right? The next part is that compliance is also going away from sample-based compliance to highly detailed compliance, because now it is AI engines and technology which is doing the compliance. So instead of checking, suppose you have a population of 5,000 people who need to be checked for something, right? You don't have to check a small sample, like a design of experiments kind of sampling theory, and say that, okay, this is a compliant population. You can just move it on into the into the machine, and the machine will check everybody, right, provided the data is there. So what happens is that these controls, compliance controls, we need them to be executable and actionable, right? And now when Indian government says that, look, we don't want, when we report to a platform that you are putting objectionable material there and we need you to remove it, you have to take action within 3 hours, right? Imagine how something like Facebook or Google is going to implement that. Right? That is where compliance by design becomes relevant. So traditionally you had this thing which says inspection, somebody coming up and saying, please show me the papers, and then in your infrastructure, in your enterprise, people would be spending a lot of time trying to prepare for the audit, right? These days we are moving towards even audit structures which are completely automatically prepared. Even the audits are done automatically, and the audit reports are saved into distributed ledgers or blockchains in an immutable way so that the regulator can verify it, right? So this is the way the technology is moving. So now what happens with that is that when the governance layer that you were trying to put together integrates with the technology stack correctly, you can rest your mind saying that this compliance by design architecture is ensuring that all the principles, whether it is coming from the jurisdiction and the legal system where your company's operations are embedded in, or it is coming from your company's internal policies, right? And these policies are very dynamic, the jurisdiction is dynamic, but the conformance is real time. As soon as the systems get updated or they understand that the policy has changed, it's easy for them to go and do this. And they can do continuous scoring algorithms, right? For example, the Hyreo algorithms for deciding how an employee is to be hired or how they are to be matched with certain requirements, right? These are the new generation of algorithms which allow you to compute a real-time dynamic continuous score, right? And we use algorithms like that in the modern compliance systems. I don't want to go through all of this, especially evidence management and things like that, but what happens from an enterprise perspective is that they are technically always audit ready. You don't have to put a whole team in getting ready for the audit, spend money, so the costs come down tremendously, right? We have seen for various kinds of compliances, especially cybersecurity compliances, application of technology reducing costs by as much as 80%, right? Just the audit preparation costs. So this is just a picture, just illustrating the same idea that the costs are coming down, right? Now, what is the business impact coming from this is that you don't need manual reviews. You don't need a large compliance team. So the idea of the global compliance officer and different compliance divisions taking care of compliance becomes a much more sleeker, narrower team, right? And this team can use a large variety of tools that exist in the world today. Right? There are, for example, there is a company, it's called Scania up in Sweden. They use a certain class of compliance tools and compliance by design tools that when an engineer is designing certain classes of products, let's say it's a brake system for a truck, they are able to ensure that the design is compliant with all the markets that they are going to. They might be addressing markets in China, markets in the United Kingdom, and the markets in the US, over and above the markets in EU. And this automatic system reduces the manual effort needed to make sure that their design is compliant, right? So the number of audit hours are lesser, the cost is lesser, and at the end of the day, the cost becomes so little, right, that compliance essentially becomes a benefit rather than a cost center. That is, you are secured against all kinds of problems, right, by your automated compliance layer. That is the target, and it becomes invisible. So a good security system is not a security system where you can see the cameras everywhere. right? A good security system is something that is invisible, it's embedded into the environment, and when there is an anomaly, it knows how to react to it, or it can even do predictive activity. It can actually look at the data as it is happening and say, we predict that an anomaly is going to happen. So in the compliance also, we are looking at predictive compliance, predictive failures as well. It's a significant part of it, where we look at, what is the probability that something will fail. Okay, so now let me bring this back to the HR question. I'll just take one particular HR problem that most of you are familiar with, right? This is how do you ensure that your HR practices, the people you're hiring, and all the practices in your HR ecosystem are compliant with the labor law or whatever additional jurisdictions in the country where you're operating, as well as with the company's own HR policy, right? Let us say that you have some policies that change depending on DEI and so on, right? Or you want to say that, look, I want a distribution of employees which match certain other target distributions that I have in the company. And if you want to implement such things, it is very difficult for you to translate it into microscopic activities at the level of your HR team. What should they do so that this becomes real? So at the end of the day, you will find that, okay, you have done a best effort activity and it is failing. There are divergences and you need to go and correct it. Right? And sometimes there is an issue with biases and so on, right, in hiring, right? There are a lot of hidden biases. The worst bias in the world is, of course, the confirmation bias in human beings, where human beings believe that they are right, and a large amount of the time they are wrong, right? It's a substantially strong bias. And the reason why we want AI in these business processes is to address these kind of biases automatically, right? Now, one particular application where we have found that AI has improved efficiency tremendously, especially with some of the US companies that I've been working with, is in whistleblower management, right? How do you ensure that the whistleblower is protected and there is significant response and activity towards the whistleblower's complaints, right, while protecting their privacy and so on, in a reasonable amount of time, right? Because too long, if it is delayed too long, it's not going to work very well. So we are able to create compliance pipelines, right, or HR whistleblower management pipelines using a class of tools which allow you to do this end-to-end thing. And then when the HR head is asked, do you have a fully functional whistleblower system? The answer is yes, a resounding yes, because the technology is enabling it, right? And the last part, this is where I want to stop, is about the fact that when you do all this, when you put in the effort to put in the right form of technology, and yes, you're absolutely, I can imagine that a lot of you people would say that these tools are not 100% there. Right? But then obviously even the humans are not 100% there, and we know how to arrange these tools in such a way that if there are errors in one, it can be checked with somebody else. Like, think of it like peer review, for instance, right? And we know how to fix how to set it up so that you overall have a 50 to 70 or even 80% reduction in the manual effort, and your total costs come down tremendously. Right? Not only can you react faster, so your total incident cost comes down, right? Even if you have to, do continuous follow-up and close a case very rapidly, right? So the total amount of time and money spent on the case, especially if you're engaging external lawyers and so on and so forth, you want to minimize that. So we have seen that in practice, just by using a set of these tools in a very intelligent way in the governance of the company, right, the total governance cost comes down in multiple dimensions remarkably. And the cost saving is tangible, obvious, and very rapid. So I just want to leave you there, right, that if you don't have these tools, your future is going to be like, a cockpit where there's a lot of issues going on and you're trying to react, right? And you do really want to transition into this smoother framework where the machines are taking care of a lot of this, right? So in many other operations in the company, for example, in your sales operations and a variety of manufacturing operations, there are all places where AI can come in because of AI's ability to be a semiotic replacement, right? It can process symbols of various kinds, just the way humans do. But in compliance management, its impact is obvious, tangible, and very rapid. So that's what I wanted to discuss with you because we have such a short period of time. Yeah.